He set the scooter down in the middle of my path, the way a man lays a trap and then steps back to watch it spring. I was 80 paces out, leading the column down Harrow Mile toward the lower gate, and I saw him do it. He wheeled the little rental machine off the curb, turned it broadside across the cobbles so it blocked the whole marching lane, kicked the stand down, and folded his arms. Then he lifted his phone, framed himself against us, and said the words I would hear 100 times in the days that followed because the whole country watched the clip. Let's see if the toy soldiers can think. Behind that bearskin and that fixed face, I can tell you exactly what went through me in that second, and it was not anger. It was arithmetic. 80 paces. 6 men behind me in close order, rifles at the slope, the drum keeping us at 116 to the minute. A rope line on both sides packed 3 deep with families who had come out in the cold to watch the relief march to the lower gate, the way they had on that mile for 200 years. And 1 rented electric scooter laid square across the only line we were permitted to take, with a grinning man beside it who had done the sums before I had, and decided he liked the answer. He thought the answer was simple. Either the toy soldiers stop dead in the road like the toys he'd called us, and he gets his clip of the famous discipline broken by a man with a phone and a folding scooter, or we break formation, scatter around his little obstacle like startled pigeons, and he gets that clip instead. He had us either way. That was the trap. It was, I'll grant him, a clever one. Most provocations on that mile are loud and stupid and burn out in 3 steps. This one was quiet and patient and built for a screen. I did not break stride. That is the first thing the clip shows, and it is the first thing people ask me about. Why didn't you stop? Why didn't you say something? The honest answer is that a man in my place does not get to have a conversation in the middle of Harrow Mile. The moment I open my mouth, the moment I slow, the column behind me concertinas, the drum loses its anchor, and 6 other men have to decide on the fly what their corporal is doing and why. So I gave them the only thing I had to give, which was certainty. I kept the pace. I kept my eyes level on the gate beyond his head, and in the half-second cadence between one heel strike and the next, I made the only decision the situation actually allowed. You learn on that mile that the march is not a parade trick. It is a way of moving a body of armed men through a crowded public street without anyone getting hurt, which means it has rules underneath the spectacle, and the rules have a hierarchy. The top rule is not never stop. The top rule is no one gets hurt. Everything else serves that. So when the path is fouled, the drill has an answer, and the answer is not to plow through a man and his property like a thrashing machine, and it is not to dissolve into a scramble. The answer is the wheel. I gave the call. Not loud, you do not shout on the mile, you cut 2 hard syllables that carry over the drum without carrying to the phones. The column answered me before the man with the scooter understood anything had changed. The whole 6-man file pivoted on the inside marker, swung clean off the center line in a controlled quarter wheel, and reformed in the outer lane, the one we keep for exactly this, a fouled path, a fallen barrier, a fainting spectator. We went around him, not scattered, not broken, wheeled like a door on a hinge, 6 men moving as one body, and closed up again on the far side without a heel out of time. He got his clip, but it was the wrong clip. On his screen the toy soldiers had thought. They had not stopped and they had not scrambled. They had simply folded around his obstacle with a precision that made the obstacle look small and him beside it smaller. I heard the crowd before I understood it, not a gasp, not a cheer, but a low ripple of something warmer, the sound a crowd makes when it has just watched somebody try to make fools of men who declined the invitation. He heard it too. I was past him by then, but I heard the pitch of his voice change as he called after us, louder now, performing harder, because the performance had got away from him. That should have been the end of it. On most days it is. A man tries something on the mile, the drill answers him without a word, and the column is through the gate before he has decided whether to be embarrassed. I have ended a dozen provocations exactly that way and never thought of them again. I want you to understand that, because what came next was not my doing and was not the drill's doing. It was his. He had built the trap to catch the discipline, and when the discipline walked around it untouched, he could not let it stand. He needed the clip he had come for, so he did the one thing the wheel could not answer. He picked the scooter up, ran 20 paces up the mile ahead of us and laid it down again. Square across the outer lane this time, the safety lane, the one we just used. And then he stood in the inner lane, blocking that too with his own body, arms wide, phone held high, so that there was no clean path left at all. "Round that then," he shouted, and I will not pretend I did not hear the crowd's mood turn at the same instant mine did, because it was the moment the thing stopped being clever and started being something else. Now there was no good answer in the drill, and that is precisely where the danger lives. A blocked center line is a problem. A blocked center line and a blocked safety lane, with a man's body filling the only gap and a rope line of families pressing in close on both sides because the crowd had thickened to watch the show, that is not a problem. That is the front edge of an accident. 6 armed men at the slope, moving at 116, do not have brakes. We have stride. If I called the halt too late, the file behind me would close on my back before they registered the stop, rifles and elbows and the long press of bodies, and the people who got hurt would not be the man with the phone. They would be whoever was nearest the rope when the column buckled. A grandmother. A man in a wheelchair I had clocked by the lamp post. The boy on his father's shoulders directly behind the scooter, leaning out over the rope to see. I have been asked since whether I was afraid in that moment. I was not afraid for myself. The bare skin and the tunic make a man look like a target and feel like a wall, and after enough years on the mile you stop being the one who's frightened. What I felt, in the stride and a half I had to feel anything at all, was the specific cold weight of being the only person on that street who could see all of it at once. The closing column at my back, the fouled lane ahead, the families at the rope, the boy leaning out, and being the only person whose next 2 seconds would decide how the next 30 went. That is the part of this work no clip ever shows. The stillness people film is not emptiness. It is a man carrying the whole street in his head, and not letting his face report the weight. So I made the second decision, and it was the one the man with the phone had been certain I would never make. I gave the halt. It is one word, the halt, cut hard on the downbeat so the file hears it through the boot and not only the ear, and it stopped 6 men inside their own length without a single elbow touching the rope. That is the thing the clip cannot explain and the man could not have known. To him, the halt was the prize. The toy soldier stopped at last, frozen in the road by his folding scooter, his clip secured. To me, the halt was the break I just decided I could reach in time. The one move that bought the rope line its safety at the only cost I was willing to pay, which was my dignity and the columns. He thought he had broken our discipline. What he had actually done was force our discipline to spend itself protecting the very crowd he was using as his backdrop. There is a difference between those two things as wide as the mile is long, and by the end of that week the whole country would understand it. In that second, only I did. We stood, and here is where the man made his real mistake, though it would take a few minutes to ripen, because a halted column on Harrow Mile is not a beaten column. It is a loaded one. The drum had cut. The street had gone quiet in that particular way a public place goes quiet when it senses it is watching something it will talk about later. And into that quiet the man kept talking, because the silence frightened him more than shouting would have. He circled us with the phone. He leaned in close to my face, close enough that I could see the little rental sticker on the scooter's stem behind him, the QR code, the unlock app still open and glowing on the handlebar mount where he'd left it streaming. He told the camera we were a tourist trap. He told it we were grown men playing dress-up for coins. He told it that a real soldier would have done something by now, and that our stillness proved we were hollow. I let him. People think the letting is the easy part and the doing would be hard. It is the other way around. Every cell in a trained man wants to answer a thing like that, and the training is the muscle that doesn't. So I gave him my eyes on the gate and my hands on the rifle at the slope and not 1 degree of anything else, and I counted, the way you count a hold a slow trigger, and I let the street watch him do to himself what no answer of mine could have done half as well. Because a crowd will forgive a man almost anything except making them watch him bully someone who isn't allowed to fight back. I felt their forgiveness leave him by the second. I did not have to take it from him. He was handing it away with both hands, on his own live stream, to an audience that was growing by the thousand as the clip began to travel. Behind me, I knew, the file was holding as hard as I was, and that costs them more than people realize, because a man at the rear of a halted column has nothing to look at but the man's back in front of him and nothing to do but not move. I trusted them to hold. They trusted me to end it. That trust is the actual material the KingsGuard is made of, and it is invisible in every clip ever filmed of us, and it was the thing that man had set out to break and could not even find. What he could not see, because his back was to it, was the mile working the way the mile is built to work. There is a route officer on every march. Ours that day was Section Officer Dale, a woman I'd served under for 3 years and would have followed into worse than a scooter, and she had been 40 paces back at the inner cordon when the first wheel happened. By the time the halt cut, she was already moving, and she does not move quickly for show. She had a radio. The mile has a control room. The mile has cameras the man with the phone never thought about because he was so busy with his own. And the mile has, 2 streets over, a council enforcement crew whose entire job is exactly one thing: a vehicle, abandoned or obstructing, on a controlled ceremonial route. He thought he was alone with us and his audience. He was standing, without knowing it, inside a machine designed across 2 centuries to do precisely what was about to be done to his afternoon. But none of that had landed yet, and a halted column cannot stand forever. The longer we stood, the more the crowd thickened, and the more the crowd thickened, the more the rope line strained, and the front edge of the accident I'd been watching for did not go away just because I'd stopped. It changed shape. Now the danger was the press itself. I could hear the rope creak behind the boy on his father's shoulders. I could see a steward at the lamp post with both hands up trying to ease the man in the wheelchair back from the edge. The man with the phone had stopped a column to make a point about its stillness, and the stillness he'd forced was quietly becoming the most dangerous thing on the street, because a still column draws a crowd, and a crowd on a narrow mile is a tide. He felt the change too. I'll give him that. He was not stupid, only vain, which is more dangerous because vanity does not know when to stop. He saw the crowd swelling around his moment, mistook the swell for triumph, and decided to gild it. He stepped up onto the scooter, stood on the footboard, one hand on the bars, the other holding the phone above his head, to lift himself over the crowd for the wide shot, the hero frame. The man who stopped the KingsGuard standing astride the very machine that did it. That was the moment Section Officer Dale reached the inner cordon at my shoulder and said, low only to me, the 4 words that told me the machine had closed. Hold him there, corporal. Not stop him, not move him, hold him there. Because somewhere 2 streets back, the enforcement crew had taken the call, and the cameras had the plate of the rental and the unlock log and the QR on the stem, and the only thing left to do was keep the man exactly where he was, performing for an audience, until the consequence he could not see arrive to collect him. So I held him there, and it cost me nothing now, because for the first time since Harrow Mile he was working for me. Every second he stood on that scooter crowing was a second he stayed put. Every taunt he threw at my fixed face was a taunt the cameras logged with his own live stream as the timestamp. He thought the stillness was him winning. It was the trap closing, and I was the bait that did not move, and the discipline he'd come to break was the thing holding the whole jaw open and patient around him. He leaned right into my face for the close-up. He wanted one reaction, one flinch, one human crack in the wall to crown his clip, and I understood by then that giving it to him was the only way I could lose. So I gave him the gate over his shoulder and the cold and the count, and I thought about the boy on his father's shoulders, and I waited. And down at the foot of Harrow Mile, where it meets the river road, a flatbed council truck with an amber light turning on its roof rolled onto the cobbles and began, very slowly and very legally, to come up the hill toward us. The man did not see it for a long while, and that, more than anything I did, is what the country remembered. He was so fixed on me, on the close-up, on the wall that would not crack, that the whole street watched the amber light climb the hill behind his back while he kept telling his camera he had won. The crowd watched it. They knew. You could feel the mood thicken into a kind of held breath, the way a theater goes when the audience can see the thing the man on stage cannot. 2 children near the rope started to laugh and were hushed, and the hushing was its own sound. The man heard the change and read it, as he read everything, as applause. He took a bow on the footboard of the scooter. He actually took a bow. Then a steward at the cordon, doing her duty, called out to warn him, "Sir, you'll want to move that, there's a vehicle." And he turned at last to see what the whole mile had been watching for 2 full minutes, and I watched the certainty go out of his face like a light switched off in a far window. The flatbed had stopped 6 feet from the scooter. 2 council enforcement officers in high-visibility coats had stepped down onto the cobbles with the unhurried gait of people who do this every day and have all the law they need folded in their breast pockets. One of them held a printed notice. The other was already photographing the rental stem, the QR code, the registration on the deck, the unlock app glowing on the mount, the very screen the man had left streaming, time-stamping his own afternoon for them. They did not look at me. They did not look at the column. To them we were scenery. The only thing on Harrow Mile that concerned them was an obstructing vehicle on a controlled ceremonial route, and the man who, the cameras now plainly showed, had placed it there twice, on purpose, and stood on it. He stepped down off the footboard fast. The performance dropped out of his voice and something rower came up under it. "It's a rental," he said. "It's not even mine. You can't take it, it's not mine." Which was true, and which was the worst thing he could have said, because the officer with the notice simply nodded, and said that the operator's account it was unlocked under was very much identifiable, that the obstruction of a ceremonial route was a specific offense with a specific schedule of penalties, and that the machine was being removed and impounded under that schedule whether it belonged to him or to the king himself. He used the word king without weight, the way you'd say the council, and somehow that flatness was the most humbling thing on the street, because it told the man what the whole encounter had told him and he had refused to hear, that none of this was about who anyone was. It was about what he had done. And then he reached for the thing they always reach for. I have stood through enough of these to know the line is coming before the man knows he's going to say it, and he said it. He drew himself up, found the camera again, and demanded to know whether they had any idea who he was, how many people followed him, what his account was worth, what would happen to a couple of council officers when his audience heard how he'd been treated. He listed his numbers. He listed them to 2 people in high-visibility coats on a cold street, and he listed them, though he had forgotten it entirely, to that same audience live, who heard their hero measure his own worth in followers in front of men loading his obstruction onto a truck. The officer with the notice did not look up from her clipboard. "I've got your operator account, sir," she said. "That's who you are for my purposes." And she handed him the notice and asked him to confirm his name for the obstruction record, and waited, pen ready, while the most followed man on Harrow Mile stood in front of a halted column of the KingsGuard and a thickening crowd, and could not think of a single thing to say that would not make it worse. I want to be careful here, because it would be easy to tell this as the moment we won, and it was not quite. We had not done anything. That was the entire point, and it is the part I am proudest of, looking back. The column had not laid a hand on him. I had not said one word to him in all the long minutes of it. The drill had wheeled, the drill had halted. The discipline had held the rope line safe and held the man in place. And then the ordinary machinery of a well-run street, a route officer, a radio, a control room, 2 enforcement officers, a flatbed truck, a printed schedule of penalties, had arrived and done, lawfully and without drama, The one thing he had bet his whole performance on no one being able to do. He had built his clip around the certainty that the toy soldiers could not touch him. He was right. They couldn't. He had simply never imagined that they would not need to. The crowd understood it before he did. That is the thing about Harrow Mile. The people who line it are not fools, and they had watched the whole shape of it from a better seat than the man with the phone. They had seen the wheel. They had seen the halt that kept the boy on his father's shoulders safe. They had seen me hold a fixed face while a man called me hollow an inch from my eyes, and they had seen the wall do nothing and win. When the enforcement officers tipped the scooter onto its side and walked it up the flatbed's ramp, the crowd did not jeer the man. They did something quieter and worse for him. They began, in twos and threes and then all along the rope, to applaud the truck. They applauded a council flatbed. I have never heard anything like it before or since. Not the column, not me, the truck, the amber light, the unhurried officers, the law arriving on time. It was the sound of a crowd that had just been shown in real time that the thing they'd lined up in the cold to honor was not the spectacle of the bearskins but what the bearskins stood for. That there are rules, that the rules hold, that a man who fouls a public way for his own vanity does not get to be bigger than the way. The applause rolled up Harrow Mile and broke over the man on his live stream, and I watched him hear it, and I watched him understand, finally, that there was no version of this clip where he was the hero. His own audience was already turning. The numbers he just recited to two officers were, even then, beginning to move against him, comment by comment, in a tide he could not stop and had built himself. He made one last try. He stepped between the enforcement officers and the ramp, planted himself in front of the scooter's path onto the flatbed, arms wide again, the same pose, the hero frame, and shouted that they'd have to go through him. And for one bad second the whole thing balanced on a knife, because a man blocking a lawful removal in front of a crowd and a column is no longer a vain fool with a phone. He is one shove from being something the day would never recover from cleanly. The officers stopped. The crowd's applause faltered, and Section Officer Dale, beside me, drew a breath to make the call that would change the afternoon's whole register, the call none of us wanted to need. That was when the boy on his father's shoulders, the one I'd been keeping safe in my head the entire time, called out across the rope in the high, clear voice children use when they have not yet learned that some things are not said. Why is the man crying on the scooter when the soldiers didn't even move? The man was not crying, but the question did to him what no truncheon and no order ever could have. The crowd laughed, not cruelly, not all at once, but a real laugh, the kind that escapes people before they can decide whether to allow it, and the laugh did the work the law had been too slow and too dignified to do. It punctured him. It told him, in a child's voice and the answering warmth of 300 strangers, exactly how the day looked from outside his own phone. A grown man weeping rage astride a folding rental while 7 soldiers stood like a wall and did not need to lift a finger, and the only person on the street who had lost anything was him. You cannot live stream your way out of that. You cannot edit it. A child had said the true thing, and the whole mile had heard it, and the pose collapsed because there was no audience left to hold it up. Stepped aside. He did it badly with his shoulders, looking at no one, but he stepped aside, and the 2 enforcement officers walked the scooter the last few feet up the ramp without another word and chained it, and the one with the notice handed him a second sheet, the impound location, the release conditions, the fee, the penalty for the obstruction itself, set down in print so there could be no later claim that he hadn't been told. He took it because his hand took it. His face had gone somewhere else. The flatbed's amber light kept turning. The crowd, having laughed, went quiet again, and it was a kinder quiet than he deserved, and a colder one than any shouting, because it was the quiet of people who had finished being interested in him. Section Officer Dale let the breath out she'd drawn to make the call she no longer had to make. I felt her ease at my shoulder more than saw it. Then she stepped back to the cordon and gave me the only word I had been waiting 200 long seconds to hear, the one that put the street back the way it was meant to be. She cleared the route. The drum picked us up again. I gave the call, and the file came off the halt as clean as it had gone onto it. 6 men and their corporal stepping off on the same heel at 116 to the minute, and we wheeled back onto the center line of Harrow Mile, the proper line, the one the man had fouled twice, now swept clear, and we marched the rest of the way down to the lower gate exactly as we had set out to do, as men had done on that mile before there were phones to film it or scooters to rent, while the crowd at the rope, the same crowd, did the thing that still puts a catch in my throat when I think of it. They did not cheer us either. They took their hats off. All down Harrow Mile, in the cold as we passed, men and women lifted their hats and held them, and the boy on his father's shoulders gave us the kind of salute a child gives, all elbow and earnest, and held it the whole length of the rope until we'd gone by. I kept my eyes on the gate. That is the drill, and the drill is the point. But I will tell you what no clip shows, because no clip was pointed the right way to catch it. Behind the bearskin and the fixed face, marching down through that quiet crowd with their hats in their hands, I was not thinking about the man with the phone at all. He had already left my head, the way every provocation on that mile leaves it the moment the path is clear. I was thinking about the boy and about the rope that had creaked, and about the 1.5 I'd had to decide whether the break would reach in time, and about the fact that it had. That is the whole of it. The disciplined people film as if it were a performance is not a performance. It is a break. And the only thing I had wanted from the first wheel to the last hat lifted was for it to reach in time. It had. We went through the lower gate in step, and the gate took us, and Harrow Mile closed quiet and ordinary behind us, and I thought that was the end of the story. It was not the end of the story, because the man had filmed all of it himself, and the country has its own way of finishing a thing like that. By the time we had stood the column down and I had handed off and walked back through the inner court to the section room, the clip was already out. Not his clip, the one he'd wanted, but the whole of it, the wheel and the halt and the held face and the truck and the child's question and the hats, cut together by 100 strangers who'd filmed from the rope and seen the shape of it better than the man at its center ever had. It went the way those things go. By that evening, it had a name people were using as if it had always had one. They were calling it the scooter on the King's Road, though Harrow Mile is not the King's Road and never was, but a story finds the name it wants. By the next morning, the clip had been watched more times than I could make sense of, and almost none of those watchers were on the man's side, and a great many of them were saying the same thing in 100 different ways. That they had not known, until they watched it, that stillness could be that strong, or that a break could be braver than a blow. I did not watch it. I am told I am in it for most of its length, a wall in a bearskin with a fixed face, and that people have frozen the frame at the moment the man leaned in an inch from my eyes and called me hollow, and that you can see in that frozen frame, if you know to look, that I was not hollow at all, that there was a great deal happening behind that face, all of it aimed at the rope line and the boy and the break. I will take their word for it. I know what was behind the face. I was carrying the street. What I did do that evening was sit with the section and not say much, the way you do after a thing that could have gone wrong and didn't, and listen to the younger lads work out aloud what they'd all just been part of. One of them, barely a year on the mile, asked me straight, hadn't it been hard, holding like that, with the man right in my face and the camera and all of it, when one step would have ended him? And I told him the truth, which is the thing I want to leave you with, because it is the only thing in all of this worth keeping. I told him it had not been hard at all, and then I told him why, because the why is the only part that matters. The hard thing would have been the step. The hard thing would have been letting that man have the one reaction he came for, the flinch that would have turned the whole street's safety into a brawl, and the column's discipline into a clip he could edit any way he liked. Holding wasn't the hard thing. Holding was the easy thing. Once you understand that the rifle on your shoulder and the wall you make with your body are not there to win arguments. They are there so that nobody at the rope gets hurt. The man thought our stillness was the absence of strength. It was the strength, spent entirely on the only thing it's for. A man who steps off his post to settle a slight has forgotten what the post is for. A man who keeps the boy on his father's shoulders safe while a fool screams in his face has remembered. That's all discipline is. It's remembering what the post is for on the worst second of the worst day, when everything in you wants to forget. The lad nodded slowly, the way they do when a thing lands, and I let it sit, and that was the end of the talking. But it was not quite the end of the story, because the days that followed finished it the way I could never have, and finished it fairly, which is more than the man had any right to expect. The scooter stayed impounded. It turned out the rental company, watching their machine become the most viewed obstruction in the country, did not care to be the brand that had blocked the KingsGuard for a stranger's vanity. They paid the release fee themselves only to take the machine back, and quietly closed the account it had been unlocked under, citing the misuse of a vehicle on a restricted route, which the man had recorded himself committing twice from the best possible angle. The obstruction penalty stood a specific offense, a specific schedule, exactly as the officer with the clipboard had read it out on the cobbles, and he paid it, because there was nothing in the footage to argue with, and the footage was his own. The fine was not large. It was never about the size of the fine. It was about the fact of it, that a public way had been fouled for a private vanity, and the way had answered, and the answer had a number on it and a date to pay. He tried for a few days to make himself the wronged party, the man bullied by a wall of silent soldiers and a heartless council, the victim of a system that couldn't take a joke. It did not take. His own audience had watched the whole of it, the wheel and the halt and the held face and the child's clear question, and they had seen what he could not edit out, that the soldiers had never moved, and the wall had never cracked, and the only person who had behaved badly on Harrow Mile that afternoon was the man holding the phone. The followers he had recited to 2 enforcement officers as if they were a kind of armor began to leave, and then to leave faster, and within the week the account he had measured his own worth by was a fraction of what it had been, hollowed out not by us and not by the council, but by the plain evidence of his own camera. He had set the trap to catch our discipline. The discipline had walked around it, and then stood inside it untouched, and in the end the only thing the trap caught was the man who built it. I never saw him again. I am glad of it. I hold no grudge toward him, and I want that understood, because the story is not improved by my hating him, and it would be a lie to pretend I do. He was vain and he was foolish, and he was, in the way of such men, certain that the world was a backdrop for his moment. And the world turned out to have rules he hadn't read and people in it he hadn't counted, a route officer, 2 officers in high-visibility coats, a flatbed with an amber light, a child on his father's shoulders, 300 strangers who took their hats off. The rules held. That is all. The rules held the way they are meant to hold, quietly and without spectacle, and a man who tried to make himself bigger than a public way discovered that the way is bigger than any one man, and always has been, and was built that way on purpose by people long dead who understood exactly the kind of afternoon Harrow Mile had just had. They asked me, a senior man and then a quieter sort of officer with a notebook, in the days after, whether I would have done anything differently. I told them no, and I meant it, and I will tell you the same. Not the wheel was right, it kept us whole. Not the halt was right, it kept the rope safe when the second foul left no clean path. Not the holding was the whole of the job, and it held. The only thing I would change about that afternoon is a thing I had no power to change, which is that a man would set a trap like that on a route where families stand 3 deep in the cold to honor something older and better than him. But men like that have always tried it in one form or another, with a scooter or a shout or a raised hand, and the post has always answered them the same way, and it always will, because the post does not change to suit the fashion of the men who test it. That is its whole strength. It is the one thing on the street that the phone cannot move. I went back on the mile 2 days later. Same march, same gait, same 116 to the minute, same families at the rope, more of them if anything, because the clip had brought them out to see the men who didn't move. I led the column down Harrow Mile in the cold, eyes level on the lower gate, and the cobbles were clear, and the center line was ours, and somewhere along the rope a boy who may or may not have been the same boy gave me a salute that was all elbow and earnest, and I kept my face fixed and my pace true and went through the gate in step, the way it is done, the way it will be done long after the clip is forgotten, and the man is forgotten and I am forgotten too. Because here is the last true thing, and then I am finished. The man wanted to find out whether the toy soldiers could think. He found out. We thought faster than he did, and harder, and about better things, about the boy and the rope and the break reaching in time. And we did it without saying one word or taking one step toward him. And the country watched us do it and understood, a great many of them for the first time, what the stillness is actually made of. It is not emptiness, and it is not show. It is a man carrying the whole street in his head and spending every ounce of himself to keep it safe, and letting his face report none of the weight. The scooter went off Harrow Mile on the back of a council truck with the law turning amber on its roof. We went off Harrow Mile on our own 2 feet, in step, through the lower gate, exactly as we had come. And of the two, I promise you, only one of us was ever in any danger of being moved.